This is not a story of war. This is not a story of conquest on horseback or rebellion with swords. This is a story of a meeting that changed the course of a continent, a meeting that split Africa without Africans, a meeting where people became property and kingdoms became lines on a map. This is the story of the Berlin Conference, the moment when Africa was sold like a commodity, and the consequences are still with us today. It began in 1884, in the heart of Europe, Berlin. Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor, extended invitations to the heads of major European powers: Great Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands. 14 nations in total. They came not for diplomacy, but for division. What was on the table wasn't policy, it was Africa. They didn't see cultures. They saw commodities. They didn't see people. They saw property. For 3 months, they gathered in high-ceiling rooms filled with smoke and arrogance. No Africans were invited, not a single elder, not a chief, not a king, not even a translator from the continent. Yet maps of Africa were laid bare before them, as if it were a cake to be cut. And cut it, they did. They called it the Scramble for Africa. But this was no game. This was theft, legalized by signatures and seals. King Leopold II of Belgium was granted the Congo, an area 80 times the size of Belgium. He called it the Congo Free State, but it was neither free nor a state. It became one of the most brutal labor regimes in recorded history. Millions died. Hands were chopped off for failing to meet rubber quotas. Villages were burned, children enslaved, and all this rubber-stamped in Berlin. Britain took Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and more, focusing on economic extraction and infrastructure that led to ports, not prosperity. France carved out West Africa, from Senegal to Côte d'Ivoire, from Mali to Chad. Portugal took Angola and Mozambique. Germany grabbed Tanzania, Namibia, and Cameroon. Italy, the latecomer, snatched parts of Somalia and Libya. Every inch of Africa, except for Liberia and Ethiopia, was handed over like meat on a silver tray. And the Europeans called it civilization. But what did the Berlin Conference actually decide? It established rules for claiming African land. 1. Any European power could claim any African territory by simply notifying others. 2. Actual control of the land was unnecessary. A flag and a promise were enough. 3. Rivers like the Congo and Niger were declared neutral and open for trade, though that trade was rarely fair. These rules were designed to avoid war between Europeans, not to protect Africans. The idea wasn't peace, it was profitable. And Africa was the prize. Imagine this: entire nations split by pencil lines. Families divided by borders they never agreed to. Ethnic groups were forced into the same colony, while others were torn apart. The Yoruba, who stretched across modern-day Nigeria and Benin, cut in half. The Ewe, divided between Ghana and Togo. The Somali people split into 5 countries. The Bakongo, scattered across Angola, the DRC, and Congo-Brazzaville. Colonial borders ignored language, culture, and history. They erased kingdoms that had lasted centuries. They mocked tribal alignments in sacred lands. What mattered to the men in Berlin was not the people, but the gold, the diamonds, the ivory, the palm oil, the cocoa, the labor. And when Africa resisted, they called it savagery. When kings defended their lands, they called it rebellion. When people refused to be ruled, they called it insubordination. And so between 1884 and 1914, the map of Africa changed completely. What had been over 10,000 ethnic and cultural groups became 50 artificial colonies. Kingdoms like Benin, Ashanti, and Zulu were dismantled. Customs banned. Languages outlawed. Names erased. Europe called it progress. Africa knew it as plunder. But the Berlin Conference didn't just redraw maps. It rewrote destinies. Education systems were built to serve the colonizers. Churches were used to spread obedience, not understanding. Roads were laid, not to connect communities, but to extract resources. Children were taught that their history began with slavery, that their ancestors were naked savages, that their gods were demons, that their skin was a curse. This was not just colonization of land, it was colonization of the mind. And when Africa finally began to rise again, when the drumbeats of independence grew louder in the 1950s and 60s, those same Berlin borders were left intact. Why? Because they were convenient for the colonizers who still pulled strings, and for the post-independence elites who inherited power from them. So today, we still live in the shadow of that conference. We still bear the weight of those lines. Civil wars erupt in places where strangers were forced to become neighbors. Political instability festers in countries stitched together by foreign hands. Languages imposed from Europe dominate schools while native tongues fade. The Berlin Conference ended in 1885, but its legacy, it is here, now every day. But we are not victims of history, we are survivors of it. We speak our languages again, we tell our stories again. We tear down lies and build new truth. Africa is not just the sum of what it lost, it is the fire of what still burns. The Berlin Conference tried to break us, but we are not broken. We are remembering, reclaiming, resisting, rewriting. Because Africa was not born in 1884, it lived long before that, and it will outlive the lies told in Berlin. This is Echoes of Africa, and today the echo speaks loudly.